I was like, well, that's what happens is sometimes bands push into a new place with their music, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Hello and welcome to Where the Living Room Used to Be, a podcast about Rhode Island's music scene. Hey everyone, it's James. My guest for this episode is the talented Roz Raskin, who you know from bands such as the Rice Cakes and Nova One. In our conversation, we talk about learning piano at an early age and what they've done to develop their voice, the importance of building a solid local following as a musician, and their approach to songwriting. Hope you enjoy the episode, and as always, please follow along on Instagram and Facebook at LivingRoomUTB for photos, show flyers, album artwork, and more from Roz's time in music.
What was your introduction to music? From what I understand, you started playing piano at a pretty young age, correct?
Yeah, so I started playing piano when I was 5. My dad is a musician. He plays piano and saxophone and clarinet, and so he was very encouraging of me and my brother to be learning music from a young age. And we had this very sweet man, Mr. Oliveira was our piano teacher. He was also in his 80s and was, I think, probably struggling mentally in a lot of ways with maybe some dementia and things like that. But he was a very sweet man. He used to fall asleep during my lessons, but he was also very nice, and he was also very, very kind and smart. And I actually did, I learned a lot from him, but I was so shy. So I remember this one time in particular, he fell asleep and I didn't really know what to do. So I just sort of sat there for the 15 minutes and waited for the time to be over.
That's funny.
I didn't want to wake him up, It was like, he's, this older man here. He needs some rest. I don't know.
Yeah. And where did you take your lessons?
So he came to our house, and I grew up on the Providence-Pawtucket line. So right in that little area over there, and he was teaching some other kids in the neighborhood. He kind of taught us the fundamentals. There's some very old piano techniques and very traditional classical techniques. And then when I got into middle school, that's when my dad pivoted and took us out of those lessons and kind of started teaching us himself. And we were doing a lot of jazz and kind of rock and roll type of stuff. And around that same time period, I started playing guitar in school a little bit. So in about 6th grade, I was playing some guitar, and then I was also joining a jazz combo when I was in 7th grade and did all-state jazz in middle school, and then I did senior all-state in high school too. So I was in jazz bands all through middle school and high school.
Yeah. And what were you listening to at home, or what were your parents listening to? Was it everything, or?
7th grade, Roz was listening to Avril Lavigne. And J-Lo, and then also like Thelonious Monk and Herbie Hancock, So, and I was a big fan of Lauryn Hill always. So it was, because we were doing all these jazz standards in this jazz band I was in. Greg Takamoto was our instructor, and he was just this really down-to-earth, sweet, amazing person who really treated us like adults. And so playing in that band really felt very similar to playing in a band in my adult years. Just very organic and kind and mindful. And so I learned a lot about playing with other people in that process, which ended up, again, transferring to the other kinds of original music I made later on.
Yeah. When did you start playing your own music?
So I started playing out. Technically, we were playing out in that jazz band in high school. And then I started to organize booking my own shows with my solo music when I was about 16, 17. And then I was playing in an alternative band at the time too.
Okay.
And so
What was
we
the
were
name of
playing. That band was called Shawn and Groupthink.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I was the youngest member of that band. Everybody in the band was at least like 22, and I was like 17.
Yeah.
And it was a wild ride.
Why do you say that?
I mean, just, like a bunch of guys in their 20s pretty much, and me. So they're all, in their party years and all that stuff. And I was like just figuring out what that all meant at that time. And, was playing a gig late night and then going to take my SATs in the morning,
Yeah.
So some of the early gigs I played were like at the Living Room, RIP.
Yeah.
And then I started to organize, my own shows. So I was playing at a lot of cafes because back then there weren't that many places that folks under 18 or under 21 could play in the city.
Yeah.
So I played like Cafe Zog was hosting shows, or just like allowing people to play in the space. So I played there. Yeah. I played at the old Ben and Jerry's that was on Angel Street.
Cool.
I think that was Angel Street in Providence, like right off of Thayer Street. And so we would just pack out those places. So I would get all of my high school friends to come there. And in retrospect, I actually was thinking about this recently. The people at Ben and Jerry's had it made because they wouldn't pay me, but they would allow me to play there. And I would bring like sometimes like 80 people out, and they would like, be selling a ton of ice cream. And I was too young to like really get that I probably could have been paid, or should have been paid.
Yeah, should have been. Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, keep playing like every Friday if you want to, you know what I mean? Like, let's fill this place up. That sounds great to me.
Yeah. And you were just excited. Like, I'm playing in front of 80 people. This is great. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were so sweet to me. So they were, it was always very kind the way that they interacted with me and with the people I was playing with. But it's like, damn, people need to advocate for themselves, because sometimes people just won't give you what you deserve,
Yeah. Absolutely.
So those are some of the early gigs that I played in Providence. Yeah. When I was in later high school. And
and were you playing a lot with Groupthink? Was that a busy band?
That band was a mess, but we did play around a good amount. But I think something that so many of the guys in that band I loved so much, but I think in general, the band struggled with a path of how to move in the world as a band. Yeah. And I ultimately had to leave the band because it wasn't really speaking to where I wanted to be as a musician, because my main focus was, I thought it was really important to have a good local base, a good local fan base.
Yep.
And there were very few people in the band that wanted to actively pursue that in a way that was like really taking it to the streets. Like at that time you could flyer for shows and people would come.
Yeah, like hitting up Thayer Street and Wicked Inn and stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Coffee exchange.
Right. So I was like bringing more people out to these little solo shows that I was playing than the shows that this other band was playing. And I wasn't getting nearly enough of a voice in that project anyway.
Yeah. Were you playing keyboards in that band?
Yeah, I was playing keyboards and doing backup vocals and writing a lot of the melodies and things like that. So when I got out of classical high school, I went to classical, and I was in the jazz band there too, that my dad led.
Nice.
Alan Raskin, amazing guy. I love my dad. And then I thought I was going to go to New York for school, to SUNY Purchase. And I was sort of on the track to do that. And I was hoping to try to enter the music conservatory there. And then I ended up pivoting yet again. And I decided to go to Rick because I was really excited about the music scene in Providence. And I wanted to see where that would take me. And I wasn't like feeling super excited about leaving. There was something that was feeling like I needed to stay.
Yeah. Okay.
So then I went to Rhode Island College, and then that's when I quit Groupthink, and then I went full throttle with Roz Raskin. And then in 2008, 2008, I think 2008, 2009 era. That's when it became Roz Raskin and the Rice Cakes, which later
Yep.
became the Rice Cakes, which later became Roz and the Rice Cakes.
That's the progression. Yeah.
And it really, I think the saddest part about that band for me, and I love that band so much, is that we on the internet, on the streaming sites, there is Roz Raskin and the Rice Cakes, and Roz and the Rice Cakes, so you can't necessarily find
separate.
So it's hard to gather all the material, if you
will. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
How did that band come about? The Rice Cakes, meaning,
So I ended up taking the bass player from Groupthink with me. He was excited about the same stuff I was excited about. Johnny Cairo, really great guy, amazing bass player. So he was the original bass player, and then Casey Belisle, who was the one and only drummer in the Rice Cakes. He and I met at Rick. And I mean, something I have to say about that school is I met some of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life there, people that I'm still very close to. A lot of like my main community are people that I met there.
Yeah.
So he was playing around in different bands and stuff, and
he was in 14-Foot One, right?
Yeah, he still is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Such an amazing drummer. Like I play drums as well, and he is just nuts, So like what he did with your recordings, but 14-Foot One is an amazing band. So, but yeah, quick shout out to that. So
yes, please. Well, so a side note, so he and I met briefly at Rick, and then we played a show together where I was playing as Roz Raskin with Johnny. He and I would do this little duo thing.
Okay.
And then Casey's band 14-Foot One, they were playing too. And so it was my first time seeing them play. It just was this small festival that was happening at Firehouse 13 when it was Firehouse 13.
Yep.
And it was around, I forget how long Firehouse had been around at that point as a venue, but it was still pretty young in terms of like putting on shows and stuff. And so I saw Casey play, and I saw them play, and I was like blown away.
Yeah.
So completely blown away. And I had this little CD that I had made called the Ecotones that I made in high school that I sold around my high school. And I was in the talent show at my high school. I won my talent show at classical.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of hawking my CDs around, and I still had that. And I was a freshman at Rick, and Casey was a sophomore. And I came up to him after the show and was like, hey, listen, here's my CD. Like, if you're ever interested in jamming, I would love to play with you, your band is so sick. You're so sick, And then I didn't really expect to hear from him. And I think that we were on like a vacation or something at that time, and we exchanged numbers. And then I randomly got a text from him like around Christmas vacation time being like, hey, I'm with my girlfriend. We're on like a road trip somewhere, and we're listening to your CD, and I love it so much. And I would really love to get together and jam. That sounds so fun.
Yeah.
So we had one practice, and that was it. We were going, and then we got a gig. Someone asked us to play a show at the living room. So we just very quickly named the band Roz Raskin and the Rice Cakes.
Yeah. Where did that come from? Was it, was there a lot of thought to it, or was it,
we were eating a lot of rice cakes.
All right.
Pretty much it.
Nice. I love rice cakes too, so it's perfect.
Lightly salted rice cakes.
You go with that? All right. See, I can go the sweet ones too, like the caramel ones, or
delicious
ones, I guess. But yeah, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Sorry for that sidebar about our dietary. We've been in quarantine, and we're just consumed by snacks. So.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Rice cakes, you really can't go wrong with the flavors. It's just such a classic base that you can elevate as much as you want with flavor. Yeah. So
that should be like the next like boutique thing. How it's been like boutique donuts and cupcakes. Now there's going to be like high-end rice cakes with some sort of drizzles on there or something. I don't know, whatever.
Well, and there are in so many Asian cultures, there are rice cakes that are like legitimate rice cakes, that are like really delicious as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we did at one show that we played at Firehouse at some point, we did do a situation where we had two friends of ours walk around with rice cakes, and we had toppings for people to put, we had snacks available at the show. Branding.
There you go. Yeah.
So, rice cakes, it was a pretty casual name. And then, what's so funny about like this moment right now in music, in art, in culture is it's kind of like anything goes in this really amazing way that it didn't feel that way when we were a band. So when we were first starting out in Providence, there was definitely certain communities that we fit into, but it generally felt like at the time, a lot of the music that was popular was being made by cis white men. I mean, that's still, I think, very much the way the world runs. I think it's changing a lot, but at the time, it's like if you weren't like a noise band or an Americana band or like a post-hardcore band, there weren't that many bands in Providence that had women in them. There weren't that many bands that publicly had queer people in them, out queer people in them. So the music scene has changed so much. So at that time, I remember, reaching out to people asking to play shows. And in retrospect, we were probably super rough around the edges, AKA we were definitely rough around the edges. So like maybe we didn't even sound that great at that time. I think we ended up sounding a lot better, like hopefully anybody would over time. But we got a lot of no answers for bookings of all, different places with different bands and things like that, or, or casual kind of people pushing us aside type of thing, which was fine. I think it helps you grow character as a band. But I remember having a conversation with Casey and then our later bass player, which was still very early on in the project, like 2 years into the project, Justin Foster joined, who is another incredible human. He joined the band, and then it just was very clear that we needed to cut out our own part of the scene because there wasn't really any music that was being made like what we were making. So we went really hard into like building our own scene, and it worked for us, Yeah.
How would you say that you did that? Was it like, again, getting back to like booking your own shows, or did you find a venue that would accept it, or?
Well, I feel like, a few different ways. I think Firehouse ended up being a really great venue for us because they allowed us to book our own shows. And Lizzie, who was booking there at the time, who now books the PVD Fest. She is amazing. She, saw how interested I was in putting on good shows. And so she was very helpful in helping me book things there. And then I would book my own bills, and we would just promote the heck out of those things. And we would, and during the height of the band, we were selling out shows in Providence. And that is something that I feel like we really worked hard on, and I'm proud of, and especially just making kind of weirdo pop. And again, like the city just didn't have much of that. So we could have easily just let that get to us and then stopped making. But it really felt like, we really gathered around each other and we're like, we want to make this a band. We want to keep making this music. And we did a lot of self-recordings where Casey and Justin were doing a lot of recording for us in our studio, all self-produced. And then later we got into more studio stuff, and we recorded at a place called Salvation Recording Company in New York, and then also at the Columbus Theater. And then our last record, we made at Big Nice Studio in Lincoln, Rhode Island.
And And that's where you've done a lot of your recording now these days, right?
Yeah. That is just, they're the best.
Yeah. How would you describe the experience recording at Big Nice? Obviously it's a comfortable spot for you now, so.
Yeah. Well, so Brad, who owns the studio, he is also in 14 Foot One. He's one of the guitar players in 14 Foot One. So I've known him for years, and through Casey, and then like through 14 Foot One, and so when he was starting up that space, and he ended up hiring someone named James Parker, who now plays in Nova One with me, as the second engineer there. So when they were starting to get that space going, and Casey knew that it was starting, and we were trying to figure out a place to do this next record, Casey was like, listen, I think we should really go down and check out this space and see what it looks like and see what it feels like, and have a meeting with Brad and check the whole thing out. And so we went down there, and it's, I mean, just right by the water. Just like such a down to earth, rad space. I mean, it really is just like a kitschy name, because, I feel like humble folks in there, sweeties in there, but with, that work really well with the gear that they have and the space that they have, and are just pumping out some amazing recordings that have a lot of heart and a lot of soul. Yeah. And so we had a first meeting there, and they were still putting the studio together pretty much when we made Devotion, which was the last record that we made together. Yeah. So we made it over that summer, and it was a blast. It was just, Brad and James together, I think work really well. And it was just a really wonderful experience all around. I think Roz and the Rice Cakes really at that time, Casey and Justin and I were writing really well together, and were working really well together. Maybe the best we ever had. It definitely felt like, in my opinion, it felt like the easiest process we'd had in making a record. And so I really feel like when we went on hiatus, it was a high note for us, because we were all getting along very well. And also, I think had made what I considered to be like a really beautiful record that was very much a representation of all of us. So I feel really excited that the last record that we made together was made in that space, with just such like good intention and good feels. Yeah,
it is. It's a fantastic record.
Thanks.
One thing, how would you say like your songwriting has evolved over time? Has there been a lot of like thought behind that, or?
I think that for me, it really became this idea of honing in on songs, like being really specific about choices in songs, not for the sake of pizzazz or even like showy instrumentation. I feel like early on, a lot of us were, like the three of us were just people that had been ripping in bands forever. Like we both just played, the three of us played super hard. So, some of the early shows that we were playing in basements, and like on tour, we, play in these wild basements. And a lot of the vibe was also, we were a party band. So we would just be like, playing super fast and playing funky time signatures, and I'd be like screaming my head off, and that there was an extra element of live. Like we had people moshing at shows, sometimes, and crowd surfing and things like that. So that was the nature of the music. So if you think about that period of time, and then when a record like Devotion came out, and I remember showing it to my dad and him being like, wait, so can people dance to this? Because, the other stuff people could dance to. Yeah. So like, what does that look like now? And I was like, well, that's what happens, is sometimes bands push into a new place with their music, and that's okay. And, we might lose some people, but hopefully people will be able to follow that progression,
Yeah.
And so I think, so something I remember talking really specifically about with Casey and Justin about that record was just how to make the record as song focused as possible. So I actually like to think that Justin was really mainly in some ways a producer on the record. He like took a big step back from writing specific bass parts to things and was more like, I would be bringing songs and then he would be helping to arrange things that were happening and bring in and out elements.
Yeah.
Casey also started writing more on that record. He was progressively writing more and more throughout the project. Justin too. And on Devotion, we did more of like duo vocals together. Casey would be singing lead on some parts, more harmonizing. But I would say that that record feels more minimal to me. And that's also where I ended up going with Nova One, because actually when Devotion was finished being written around that same time, towards the end of that, I had this chunk of songs that I didn't really know what to do with because they weren't fitting specifically with the Rice Cakes, and I knew that they belonged in like another realm, but I wasn't really sure where to put them yet. So I didn't even have like a name for the project specifically when I made the songs.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. I'm just realizing that now. I don't think that the band specifically had a name. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would say like that to me is what part of the progression was. And I'm trying to go back to your question here, but I feel like the simplicity was something that ended up being more important to me over time. And just being super intentional about parts, intentional about lyrics, intentional about dynamics, just approaching things with as much intention as possible so that everything really feels like it's there for a reason. There's like true purpose and meaning behind everything, almost too much so in some cases, but I love to hone in on that stuff now.
Yeah. Okay. How did you feel like working at other studios? Like, I mean, you mentioned Columbus, and you worked at Machines, or have they just mastered stuff there? Have you recorded there? Or,
So Machines mastered a record that we did at the Columbus, Meet to Feed. Seth and Keith, and Keith was so wonderful to work with. He's great. Yeah. I love those guys so much. But I mean, I could say all sorts of things about different recording experiences I've had, and I've had a lot of them. I've actually, done various little projects in little studios or sat in on things with people or whatever. Yeah. And I feel like the thing for me as a musician is having worked in a lot of spaces that felt particularly toxic, in that there's a lot of engineers, I think, in the world that want to produce more than they say that they do. And so, and I also think that at the same time, there are a lot of bands that don't know what they want. So, I take responsibility in that. I feel like a lot of the time growing up, when I was recording in different spaces, I didn't really know how to vocalize what it was that I wanted and needed from a specific studio. So you go into a studio, you're paying them. You're like, hey, please record my music if you're interested in recording my music. Or in some cases, even if they're not interested, they'll record it anyway because they're trying to make some money, whatever, But so I think that for me, I really needed to grow to use my voice in a way that really was being true to who I was and who I am. So I think a lot of my struggle with studios over the years, and almost like, I think something that put a bad taste in my mouth about studios at different points throughout the years, was really feeling like I was working with the wrong people. And there was also times when, like, for example, as a band in the Rice Cakes, we were not all on the same page, and we would be in a studio space where there'd be too many cooks in the kitchen, and we'd all be trying to sort out what it is that we're trying to make. And everyone has their own idea about what it is that we're trying to make. So I guess what I'm saying is in talking about engineers and band members and different musicians, it's really more about folks being able to hone in on what they want to get out of a given experience. So I think something that was really helpful with the Devotion record was not only was our band on the same page about what it was that we were making, but we also knew the right ways to communicate that to the studio.
Yeah.
And so I think that I can just think about so many different times over the years when I didn't have a really clear idea of what those things were. So, and it's so easy to have a studio space become a really toxic environment without you even realizing it, because you're stuck in this space for hours and you're trying to make the thing to the best of your ability, but sometimes you're just not in a really great place to be making, but you're in there anyway. You're paying for the time, you know? So, and then I feel like with the Nova One stuff, that was, you know, even more of an experience for me to be able to, I came to Brad and I said, hey, listen, I've got this side project and I have these tunes that I have a very clear vision for, and I'm not looking for anyone to produce. I'm looking to like self-produce and, you know, have you help me find the right gear and get the best recordings that you can. I'm looking for someone to engineer a good record for me, you know? And he said, I'm super into it. And then in that experience, by day 2, I said, how do you feel right now about doing more producing? So we were able to have chats within the experience, but very clear that like now I think it's appropriate for you to help to fulfill this role. And when you shout so loud, all I wanna do is come right now. I think you're all that I've been waiting for. I just wanna be your girl. And some things can't be sorted, can't be sorted out. I'm a rabbit and I'm flying in your polluted sky.
WBRU is a big part of the Rhode Island music scene. It was a big part. I grew up outside of Rhode Island, but I would listen to it a lot. And so I apologize for bringing this stuff up if it's like, you know, bringing up Rock Hunt stuff, but you're my first Rock Hunt winner that I'm talking to. So just kind of wanted to talk quickly just about that experience of you know, going through that and winning it and what it was like on the other side.
You know, the funny thing about the Rock Hunt, oh my gosh, you know, I'm loving that you're bringing up the Rock Hunt right now. I think that's a great piece of my memory that I feel open to digging into for sure. So I had considered the Rock Hunt a bunch of different times. My dad was in the Rock Hunt, I think in like the early 90s or something.
Okay.
He competed in it. And what was really great about us entering was that it wasn't a big deal to us at the time. I figured we wouldn't get in. And I also, because we are always the band. We were always the band that lost the Battle of the Bands.
Okay.
We came in second on probably a handful of Battle of the Bands.
Yeah.
Never the first. And so we just always figured that it was just it's a crapshoot. It's totally subjective. It's like, you know, who really wins those things, you know? And so we entered it, and then we got into the first round. And what was actually the funniest part about it was we had a bunch of tour plans. So we weren't even sure if we were going to be able to like fully compete, because it was, what was nice about when we entered was that it was really just one tiny piece of where we were at as a band. We were touring a ton, we were recording a ton. It was like, oh, if this happens to happen, great. But if it doesn't, great, you know? And I always thought that it was really interesting that so many bands that I'd seen that entered those things, they were playing one show and it was the Rock Hunt, you know, and we were, cause it's like such a local band thing.
Yeah.
And at that time we were a touring band, really more so than we were playing in Providence. So we had, you know, that show on our schedule. And then we had like another 25 shows that we were playing, you know, down to Austin or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was nice to not have all of our eggs in one basket. It was sort of like, if this thing happens, cool. And then we ended up making it to the last round, and then we ended up winning. And it was just this like really funny experience where I just remember winning it and being like, I can't believe we won. I can't believe of all Battle of the Bands that this is the one that we win.
Yeah.
And it was huge for us. It was, I mean, I think especially because we already had so much going on. We were already such a high functioning band. Like we were really trying to make it what we were doing. That it was super beneficial. So we were being played on the radio as much as anything else was. So it was a huge leap for us as a band in terms of just like getting the word out there about our shows and about our music. And we had 2 singles that were playing on there for a whole year. Like it was, you know, they would have Pearl Jam on, and then it would be like Roz and the Rice Cakes, Yellow Fields, Roz and the Rice Cakes, Magma, you know? So we were, I think what's so interesting about music is people all of a sudden will see you in a different light if you're in a tier with like other people, even if we're not real, like we're clearly not Pearl Jam, you know what I'm saying? But but like even hearing us involved in these other bands that people think of as like untouchable, like elevated our career at that time. At least locally, you know, well, really only locally, I would say. But it was really great for local shows that we were playing around here. Those are probably some of the wildest shows that we played were around that period of time.
Cool.
And BRU was super sweet to us. And I think that we originally thought that BRU was, I feel like in the community in Providence, I think that for a long time, BRU was seen as something that had gone completely corporate and was completely detached from the local scene, because they barely played any local music, you know?
Yeah.
And then actually Wendell, who ended up becoming the director there, he was a huge advocate for, they had like a local thing at 9:00 pretty much every night during the week. He was the advocate for really making sure that they involved more local bands and opening for larger acts and things like that when they were coming through Providence. And actually at that time, he was saying to us that we were a band that really opened up the actual competition to welcoming more Providence bands to join, because so many bands thought that they were so lame for so long that we were kind of like, we'd won this thing and we were part of the bigger local scene. So people were like, oh, maybe I'll try out next year, you know?
I got you. Yeah.
So yeah. And they also, you know, that they gave you a pretty cool photo shoot, you know, they jammed that show. Our show, I don't know if you remember this, but our show was supposed to be an outdoor show, you know, in downtown Providence. Like after you win, you headline a show, and our show was rained out. So what they did was, at the time, Whiskey Republic was the plan B. But the problem with the Whiskey Republic is that venue really theoretically probably fit 300 or 400 people. And so we were all nervous because we were like, is anyone going to know where the show is? Because it was supposed to be clearly like in the same place it is every year for multiple shows in Water Place Park, you know?
Yeah.
And so we went down to the radio station and we did like an interview before the show to get people excited and to see where they were at and if they were moving it and yada, yada, yada. It was like everything was like hour by hour. And I said, you know, I'm so nervous. Is anyone going to come to the show? And Wendell was like, Roz, you should not be nervous about if people are going to come. It's whether or not people can fit in the venue, because we're expecting over 2,000 people regardless of what happens. So we ended up playing the Whiskey, and there was like at least 100 people outside of the venue that were just outside listening while they like jammed in. I don't even know how many people inside the venue.
Yeah.
So that show was absolute insanity. And we also had our dads play. So my dad played sax on a song. Casey's dad plays percussion, so he played some percussion. Johnny Bongos, and then
awesome.
And then Jack Foster played drums, which is Justin's dad.
That's really cool. Wow.
So that was a fun show. So yeah, we had, I have, to be honest, nothing but really positive things to say about BRU. They were, even like the years after, they were super encouraging to us, and they bring us in and to talk about our different releases, and they would have us on the radio giving off, away tickets. And it was surprisingly, to me, like, as I was a kid that loved BRU, and then was a person that was like, maybe BRU's lame. And then I was like, BRU's awesome. Like it became that later, once I realized how much Wendell had invested in the local music community,
Yeah, no, I mean, I had a very similar experience. I listened to it a lot, but there was that transition where it kind of moved away from the college radio-y kind of station to the more just playing what was around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also something that I thought was really interesting that I didn't realize until I was talking to Wendell about it in the space was there's so many complaints from people, like, the music that's played on BRU is so shitty. Like, why are they playing all the shitty music all the time and the same songs over and over again? And he's like, we get requests for Jeremy. Like, we get requests for these songs. We get requests. Everything you hear on the radio, for the most part, is requests. People in your state are calling to hear the Red Hot Chili Peppers over and over again. They're calling and they want to hear Imagine Dragons. And they want to hear this, that, and the other thing. Like, we're not pulling this stuff out of thin air. Like, we're taking requests and we're playing things that people want to hear, So, like, I'm sorry that you're bummed that people in your community want to hear this stuff, but, like, we're trying to play what people want to hear.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, that's true. And, like, if you really want to hear that song by that more obscure band, call and request the song or whatever.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that they were taking that many requests, that was like such a big part of their programming.
I was thinking it was like Airheads or something like that,
Right. Right. And I think probably to some extent it was like that. It was kind of in and out depending on who was directing the station. But while he was there, he really tried to make it be like, we want to play what people want to be hearing here.
Cool. But yeah, let's get into some of your newer stuff and talk about Nova One and like how that kind of came about.
Sure. Yeah. So I gave you some of the origins of just how the songs got recorded. So some of the songs were written, and that was just something that happened to exist simultaneously with the Rice Cakes had made our record, and we put out that record with Team Love Records. Mm-hmm. And that felt good to put that out. And we did a tour on that. That was really fun. But I was creatively feeling really mixed about the project. And so much of it was, so much of that band was directed by me in a lot of ways over the years, artistically. And I was feeling tired, and I wasn't sure really where to bring anything next. And I didn't want to grow resentful of that and not knowing where to move to next. Yeah. So that ultimately was what led me to pausing on that project and bringing that idea up. But then at the same time, it kind of felt like there was two worlds that were happening at the same time, because it wasn't really so much I want to end the Rice Cakes in order to start Nova One. It was really more, if in an ideal world, if I had been feeling more in a creative place that I could have balanced two projects in that way, it would have been great to continue the Rice Cakes. But it also felt like maybe we just needed to pause.
Yeah.
So then I sent off those recordings that I made at Big Nice Studio to Community Records. And that conversation originally started because I was thinking about even starting my own tiny label, just something that was putting out tapes sometimes, or like really limited 7 inches or something along those lines. Yep. And I had made some kind of social media post about it. And Greg from Community Records, who we knew from playing in New Orleans, and he had the label there for a long time. He commented and said, like, seriously, if you want to start a label, I think you'd be good at it. And if you ever want to talk about it, like, feel free to hit me up.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my gosh, cool. Yes, I would love to chat. So we got on the phone and we were talking a lot about it. And then I also said, just as a complete side note, you know, I have this set of 6 songs. Would you be interested in checking it out? It's a side project to Roz and the Rice Cakes, like just my solo stuff. And he was like, yeah, send it on over. I'd love to take a listen. And then the next day he was like, yo, what's going on with this? Can we put this out? And I was like, what? Yeah, that sounds cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was like the right place, the right time, and they were really interested in putting it out and putting it out on vinyl. And so that's how that whole thing came to be. And then throughout that year, I was really visualizing more of the components of what that band was. And now we all play in costume, which is really fun. And the band is in some ways a collective of musicians, and that there's nobody really that's officially in Nova One, but also like everybody's in Nova One. But there's like about 9 different people, I think, that have played in the band at this point in Providence, and people kind of step in and step out. And actually Casey has been one of our main drummers since the beginning. And he also played on Secret Princess, and he also played on the most recent record, Lovable, and James also played drums on Lovable too. And Brad sat in on a few tunes too, Brad Krieger from Big Nice.
Yeah.
And and then I played some bass guitar and sang, and on the new stuff. And I actually did play drums on one song on Secret Princess, on the song Your Girl. I played drums on that.
Cool.
It's actually the one song I can say that I played everything on.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Which was fun.
Yeah, I envy anyone that can play all of those instruments. You know, like I was trying to like describe like what a bass line should be once, and I could not do it. They're like, why don't you just play it? I'm like, I can't play it. I'm like hitting a string and it doesn't sound anything like what I'm trying to do. And so it doesn't go both ways in my experience, you know.
I think over the years, I really learned through playing with so many wonderful players. I mean, really, Casey and Justin being just 2 of the most wonderful people I've ever played music with, not only just as people, but just exceptional musicians. That I learned a lot about drums, and I learned a lot about bass through playing with them. So I played, like I played bass in Roz and the Rice Cakes on a few tunes. And I didn't play really drums at that time, although we would sometimes, we would do like some really late jam sessions where I would play drums and Justin would play keys and Casey would play bass. We would get pretty wild with it. But so I think I got braver in terms of visualizing what it was that I wanted. So like during the Nova One sessions, it was the first time that I was thinking to myself, I know what I want from the drums. And so I was able to direct Casey, and he and I had a phone call where I said, hey, listen, I really want you to sit in on these sessions if you're interested, but you know, I would love it for us to find a way to communicate that's different than it was in the Rice Cakes. Like, I'm going to pay you to do the session, and I want things to be played in the way that I'm seeing in my head. Like, are you down to be directed, but then also be giving it your flavor at the same time, but really being super tasteful specifically for what I'm envisioning for these songs. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I know what you're saying, and let's do it. And it's been that way since the beginning. He's just been so incredibly wonderful to work with, because he's like a metronome, you know, and he's got so much finesse, and he makes the simplest parts just sound so rich and dope. He's fabulous.
He's great. Yeah.
Yeah. You've seen 14-Foot-One.
I guess since we're kind of talking about instruments and stuff like that, you have a amazing voice.
Oh, thanks, James.
It's it's up there with just some of the top people. But did you take any vocal lessons? Have you trained that have you trained in any way for singing, or is it more of a natural thing for you?
I am a bedroom vocalist.
Okay.
For sure. I feel like I early on, somewhere early on in elementary school, I sang for a friend of mine that told me I had a bad singing voice. It took many years for me to get my wits about me to really sing in front of other people. And I spent years just singing into a cassette player in my room, just really trying to hone my own voice on my own.
Yeah.
And then I also had the privilege of singing with some amazing singers through middle school and through high school, just friends of mine that were also really into music. So my friend Lily Kendall, she and I would sing on all sorts of tunes that we were either writing together or doing covers in middle school. And then when I was in high school, I sang a lot with my friend Lucy Packard, and she and I would be doing Lauryn Hill covers. We did some Pixies covers. And then that's when I really learned how to harmonize, was during those periods of time with those two particular singers. We just would spend hours feeling the goosebumps you feel from harmonizing and really getting the pitches right, you know?
Yeah.
So I definitely feel like when I hear old recordings now of myself, what's really interesting is I can tell what I was trying to do, like what I was working on. And I feel like something that I have discovered more so in the past few years is really where the strengths of my voice lie. Because our voices are so multifaceted. There's so many ways that you can work your particular style of singing. And it can really, I mean, there's so many people, like I can even think, this is such a random thought right now, but someone like Steven Tyler, like early Aerosmith to later Aerosmith, sounds like a completely different singer in some ways, you know? And so I feel like as we grow, our voices develop and you're able to hear things that you didn't hear before, or, you know, I feel like for me, my approach changed. Like I didn't like yelling. I didn't like screaming. There was times when it felt like I just was using my voice in ways that were really just, the only thing was really accomplishing was sort of like an American Idol moment. You know what I'm saying? And like, you know, just like unnecessary use of voice that almost felt like abusive to my voice, just for the sake of, you know,
just trying to go to that limit or whatever.
Pushing the boundaries of everything, really. And so I think when I started making that last record with the Rice Cakes at Big Nice, that was really when I changed my approach to how I wanted to sing.
Yeah.
And I think that had a lot to do with the miking, and also with my miking versus my headphone mix and what I was hearing. And so I feel great about the vocals on that record. And then I feel like they got better on Secret Princess. And I think that I'm the most proud of the most recent vocals I did on Lovable.
Yeah. Your voice sounds great on everything there. So
thanks. I mean, it's definitely years and years of honing in on stuff and just grinding it out. And I feel like I wish, looking back, I mean, hey, no regrets 2020, but I do wish that a younger version of myself had taken more time to be more purposeful in the things that I was doing. And yeah, I feel grateful that I didn't rip through my voice in a way that hurt it, because I easily could have hurt my voice in a lot of the ways that I was using it. And I've become a lot more careful with the way I use my voice now.
Yeah.
Do you see why I see why inside.
I'd like to talk about your connection to Riot. How did you connect with them, and what are you doing with them now?
So I'm on the board of directors there, and I've been on the board for, I think this is my third year, and I've been volunteering there. So the organization is 11 years old. So I've been volunteering there for like 9 or 10 years. And I first played a luncheon performance there because they have these really cute lunch performances during the day where they bring in local artists to come and play for campers.
Oh, okay.
So Hillary Jones, the founder, invited me in to do that. And then I was like, what is this world? Because, again, as I was saying to you at the time, so much of what I knew from the Providence music scene was a lot of dudes.
Yeah.
And so when I walked into this space and I was surrounded by women, trans, and non-binary people, I was like, what is this magical land that I have stumbled upon? Like, I'm so psyched that Hillary asked me to come and be here. And then she was telling me how they were trying to get the keyboard program started there and asked me if I wanted to volunteer to teach keyboards. And I was just starting to teach more around that time, so it was perfect for me. So I started to teach there, and then I was also beginning my teaching practice outside of that, and I worked at a few different music schools too. But so I have taught keyboard there for many years, and that was my first major involvement. And then a few years ago, Hillary got in touch with me about joining the board, so then a lot more of my focus has been around that the past few years, and I am just so excited about the name change. The organization as a whole has made some huge steps in becoming way more inclusive. There's a whole anti-oppression committee that is just surrounding the best ways to support all folks that are a part of our programming, that volunteer, that are on the board, and making sure that we're deeply doing anti-racist work, and actually supporting the population that's involved in our programming, So, I'm thrilled. And we also have 2 new co-directors, Denise and Ricky, that are a dream team, and they are fabulous. And right now we're going through it, as everybody's going through it. I forgot during this conversation, James, that there's a pandemic going on. So I appreciate the conversation, because I have momentarily forgot about the pandemic.
Good. But now we're back to it. We were talking about 2012 and BRU, and now
I know another period of time. So we're trying to do some fundraising right now to really gather as much funding we can around keeping the organization afloat during this really difficult time, because right now, like so many other places, nonprofits and local businesses, we're temporarily closed to make sure that we're curbing the virus as much as possible. So just trying to do what we can right now to keep the organization moving and grooving, and continue the work. The youth are just so amazing. The new space we have, which is right across from Classical High School, is incredible. It's much bigger than our other space that we had. It's right behind Nice Slice. And can you imagine if that place had existed there when I was at Classical? Right?
Yeah.
I went to New Urban Arts in high school, which is an amazing program. But that whole block, with Rimosa's there, Youth Pride is there. There's that whole educational block is rad. So that's my current involvement, is I'm on the board there.
Cool. How are you? I guess, we're talking via Zoom right now. It's my first remote interview for this podcast, but how, I guess, twofold, like how is Riot handling with their online teaching, and you as well? Like, how have you adapted to that, in that professional sense, but also as a performer? Has it been going okay? Has it been?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think so many folks are speaking out about how grateful we feel for the live music scene, right? It's, there's so many like memes about jokes about trying to get people to come to shows, and people, it's just, I think we're all feeling like we wish we had all the things that were so easily accessible before, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think that, so as of right now, like the big thing that we're doing at Riot is we're offering gear loan. So you dropping instruments to people's homes to offer them a way to be learning an instrument while they're home, while they're in quarantine. And then we're offering the packets that we normally would use for instrument instruction during the camps and programming. We're offering people to access those on the internet. And then I actually would need to check in with them about how the remote learning is going. But I heard from one person that it's going okay. And I think that some of the things that can be tough about remote learning, and, you know, obviously our entire education system is feeling this right now, is being able to navigate so many kids in one space. And this is something that we do constantly at Girls Rock, is we teach large groups.
Oh, okay.
So it's, you know, it's definitely, you know, I've taught huge groups of kids. I've taught individual groups of kids, smaller groups. I think at Girls Rock, the most that I've taught at once was 9 young people I taught at one time. And then there's also been times when I literally taught one person or 2 people, you know? And then my lessons are all private instruction. So for me, I am loving remote teaching for a lot of different reasons. I think that, there's, you know, people really do become much more self-sufficient. I think with this way of learning, it really does require people to be listening in this special way. We got this lag going on, you know, we have to make sure, like, things will cut out sometimes. You have to make sure that you're very much in the moment and you're really listening to what people are saying, and me and the other person. And then I also feel like it's a nice way for me to be super duper organized. So like I'm sending people emails at the end of the day to make sure it's really clear what we're working on. And then we also have I have some shared folders with my students that I'm able to gather all the things that we're going to work on next time, or that we're currently working on, or if you have ideas of songs you want to be working on, or if you want to be editing a file of a song that you're writing, like we can see those things. Anytime I log in, I can see the extra work that you did on that project. So I think in those ways, I'm actually surprised that I hadn't done that sooner. Just with my in-person lessons, just to have a more of a digital space to exist for all the materials. So I think that those are some assets to remote teaching that I'm feeling right now. And yeah, I think we're all just going to learn a heck of a lot more about the internet in this experience.
You did a live stream with Nova One recently. How was that experience? Like, was it a successful experience for you?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, we had a bunch of people watching on there. It was very fun. It was bizarre to just finish playing. You know, we played like something like 10 songs or something, and to just be like, and that was another song. So, you know, to nobody. And then to just like see people silently commenting on this thing, and like just such lovely little words of encouragement. And we for that particular stream, we shared the proceeds of that people donated between us and this organization called Amore, which is doing really amazing work in the community right now surrounding the pandemic, and people that have temporarily lost work, or, you know, potentially their businesses have closed, and trying to get the necessities to people during tough times. So it was nice to be able to not only play a show to make sure that, you know, I'm able to sustain the band, but also to help sustain the community. Too. But so I think we're going to do another one soon. I'm trying to figure out what that's going to look like. I think it would be fun to do some themed streams. Like we were starting to work on a Dolly Parton cover set. Earlier this year, that ended up having to be postponed. But I would love to be able to do a Dolly Parton themed stream.
That'd be great.
So yeah,
nice.
It's been interesting, and it's definitely taken some getting used to. And yeah, our whole tour has been postponed for what was supposed to be essentially all of May. We were going to be on the road and doing a bunch of shows to promote the new record, and that's not happening. So we're all adapting, and it's, and I think that the toughest thing right now is, we're a part-time touring band, and, I would love for us to be a full-time touring band at some point. But for the bands that are touring full-time, I think this is particularly just such a tough moment for, this is for people that are not, I have the privilege of that. I always knew that I needed some kind of plan B, because it was not the primarily, because touring was not a huge moneymaker, but it was sustaining us. And there were times that it was more of a financial benefit to be on tour than not. But as of right now, I can lean back into teaching. And for bands that have just been touring, it's such a tough hit, because it's how people are making their money.
Yeah. And plus everyone that's kind of connected with it, if you're a light technician or a roadie for the band, it's like you're not even have the publishing rights that, you might still be getting some money from streams or whatever else people can listen to. Like if you're not, setting up drums for the, as a drum tech, then you're not getting paid. And it's a really rough thing for so many people. So.
Yeah, well said. Like people that are session players, people that are booking agents. There's so many. I think sometimes people forget for sure. There's so many jobs there's such a big team that makes any given band exist the way that it is, exists. Like DIY is always really just DIT doing it all together, So, any of your favorite bands out there, there's a whole bunch of people that are working on making that band what it is. So it definitely, there's some unsung heroes behind the scenes that are propping up all these projects that definitely need to be paid. And, it's a tough time for the music industry, 100%.
Yeah. I did want to ask, as we kind of wrap stuff up, what would you say is your greatest music accomplishment?
Oh, wow. My greatest musical accomplishment, I would say, this is maybe sounds like a simple thing, but I think is such an important thing to me, is really anytime I get a message from someone saying something like, hey, this song or this album or your music really speaks to me, or this helped me through something, or I really connect to this piece of music in this way, or when people are singing words at shows and things like that. I think that those moments feel like the biggest musical accomplishments to me, because ultimately I'm in this thing because I want to commit. Not commit. I want to connect.
Yeah.
I am committed. But I want to connect to people.
Yeah.
And, even when we were early on touring and stuff like that, I was really more excited about going to see my friends that I met in Asheville, or my friends that I met in wherever the hell. I was more excited about that sometimes than I was about the show that we were playing that night. So, so to me, I feel like my greatest musical accomplishment is really those types of moments. There's definitely like a bunch of really notable shows that we've played that I feel excited about, but I think that ultimately, like, the biggest feeling of gratification is moments when you feel like the right people that are like really understanding what it is you're doing are voicing that to you.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or?
I think your questions have been exceptionally thoughtful, and I just appreciate you having me on. And I think this is such a wonderful time for a program like this to exist, that you're highlighting different artists in the community. So thank you. And I think you've done a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you so much, Roz.